All right. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Reminder again that our siyum will be on Shabbos, Emir Hashem, with a short siyum right at the end of davening, followed by a deluxe kiddush. The deluxe kiddush will have rolls. It will not be a seated kiddush. It's a regular setup for a kiddush, just that you get to be yotzei your suda in kiddush, and then your shalosh shudas can be when you get home. The way things are looking, the earliest possible mincha on Shabbos is 11:59. So depending on how long kiddush goes, maybe we can chap a mincha too after our suda, as it were, after deluxe kiddush. We'll see, because there's not going to be Daf Yomi on Shabbos. Daf Yomi will have been all of 5 minutes at the end. Yeah.
Like a wife and two kids, you can sit together.
Of course. I mean, I don't know that you'll necessarily merit the together piece, but that I don't know.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 just like tables in the corner. So
Yeah, we'll have the walls open. So on the women's side, the tables will still be there from the women's side, so you can chop one of those tables. All right, we're starting. Where are we starting? We're starting halfway down on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, and we're going to cover a lot of ground today. I'm going to be reading pretty quickly. The Gemara is not so difficult, but just keep a finger on the place because we're going to be moving. We're starting halfway down, right above that little cutout of Haziv Lach. And we're actually going to look at that in just a moment, because the Gemara is now going to talk about what is the shiur shel yom for Musaf on Shabbos. So it says the Gemara, what did they say? The Musfei de Shabsa Mahayu Omrim. What did they say? Amar Rav Anan bar Abba Amar Rav Haziv Lach. Haziv Lach is an acronym. It's Rosh Prakim. It's the first letters of each section of much of Parshas Ha'azinu. So the Hey is Ha'azinu Hashamayim, and take a look at this little. Is it a Tosfos? Okay, you got to figure out what it is. But it says Haziv Lach Ha'azinu Zachor Yemos Olam Yar Kivehu Vayar Lule and Ki. Those are the parshios. Those are the little sections within Parshas Ha'azinu. So they would say all 6 of those. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava Amar Rav Kederach shechalukin kan kachalukin beveis hakneses. Just like they would be split up in the way that it was read. In the way that it was read by Musaf on Shabbos, by the Korbanos Musaf on Shabbos, that's how the Aliyahs were also broken up in Parshas Ha'azinu for the Baal Koreh. Okay, all of that has to do with Musaf. Then b'mincha de Shabsa mahayu omrim. What was said when they would bring the by mincha on Shabbos? So the Gemara answers. Amar Rav Yochanan, they would say Az Yasher Umi Kamocha and the Az Yasher. There's 2 Az Yashers, as we know. One is the regular one by Yitzias Mitzrayim. One's about the Be'er. So these are the 3 prakim that they say. The Mi Kamocha is actually the second part of the original Az Yasher. So 1, 2, 3 Az Yasher, Mi Kamocha, and Az Yasher. So the Gemara asks, the last of the super short lines. Hani Kulu Bechad Shabsa Amrei Lahu. Were they saying? On every Shabbos, they said all 6 little parshios of Ha'azinu by Musaf, and then they'd say all 3 parshios by Mincha. O Dilma, or perhaps Kol Shabsa v'Shabsa Amrei Chad. They would just say one section of each on every Shabbos. How did it work out? So the Gemara responds, Tashma, 3/4 of the way down, says the Gemara, Detanya Amar Rabbi Yossi Ad Shaharishona Omeres Achas. By the time that all of the Musaf ones were said once, Shnia Choseres Shtayim. Because remember, we said there are 6 sections that were said by Musaf and 3 sections that were said by Mincha. So that's a X to 2X ratio. So it says the Gemara, by the time they finished with 1 round of Musaf, they had done Shnia Choseres Shtayim. They had done 2 rounds of the mincha, which means that they were doing it once a week. Shema mina kol Shabbos v'Shabbos amri chad. Shema mina. They were not saying everything with every Shabbos musaf, and by mincha they'd say just Shabbos number 1. They'd say Hazinu Hashamayim va'adaber, the first aliyah. By mincha they'd say the first Az Yashir, and they'd keep going through the list. So it would take 6 weeks to get through all of the psukim from Ha'azinu, and it would take only 3 weeks to do mincha. And that is how the Gemara answers this question. The Gemara is now going to get into an agadata that is pretty lengthy with a lot of psukim. Let's get started. We're at the last of the short lines on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3/4 of the way down. Amar Rav Yehuda bar Idi, Amar Rav Yochanan. Eser Masos Nasa Shechina Mikroi. There were 10 travelings of the Shechina from Psukim. Uchenegdan, and similarly, there was also Galsa Sanhedrin Migmara. We also know that the Sanhedrin moved around multiple times Migmara, but that's a tradition that's not based on Psukim. So again, 10 movements of the Shechina based on Psukim, and 10 movements of the Sanhedrin not based on Psukim, but rather on a tradition. What were the Eser Masos Nasa Shechina Mikroi? Says the Gemara, the Shechina moved Mikaporis Lekruv. It moved from the Kaporis to the Kruv, and Mikruv Lekruv, from one Kruv to the other. From the kruv to the miftan, the threshold of that room. Miftan l'chatzer, and out into the chatzer. Chatzer lemizbech, over to the mizbech. Mizbech legag, over to the roof. Migag lechoma, into the walls of the city. Michoma leir, out to the city. Meir lehar, up onto a mountain. Mehar lemidbar, into the desert. Those are the 10 steps that the Shechina took. Midbar also v'yashva b'makoma, and from the midbar, the Shechina went back to its place up in Shamayim. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom. Shneimar einach hashuv el makomi. I'm going to go back to my place. That's what the Gemara says. Then, as a little bit of detail, we learned about these 10 steps. How do we know about all of these 10 steps? The Gemara says 3 lines into the very wide lines. Lamed aleph, lamed aleph. Mikapores, excuse me, 2 lines. Mikapores the kruv. We already said above from the kaporos to the kruv, mikruv lekruv, mikruv lemiftan. How do we know all of those are true? That the Shechina went to those locations. The pasuk says first, benoati loch sham v'dibarti itach me'ala kaporos. So that's what we know. It started there. And then another pasuk says uksiv vayirkav al kruv vayaaf, that it was on one of the kruvim. And then it says uksiv uchvod elokei Yisrael na'aleh me'al hakruv asher hayalav el miftan abayis. And that includes all of that. Okay, what's next? When we miftan l'chatzer, what's the pasuk? How do we know that the Shechina moved from the threshold to the chatzer? Says the Gemara, habayis es he'anan ve'achatzer mele'ah es nagag v'od Hashem. So we see that it went to the chatzer. The chatzer lemizbeach. How do we know that it went from that the Shechina went from the chatzer to the mizbeach? T'chsiv reisi es Hashem nitzav al mizbeach. I saw that Hashem was sitting on the mizbeach, so we know the Shechina moved there. What about a mizbeach legag? How do we know that it went onto the roof? T'chsiv tov lasheves al pinas hagag. It's good that the Shechina is sitting on the corner of the roof. What about migag lechoma? How do we know the Shechina went to the choma? Says the Gemara, v'nei Hashem nitzav al chomas. How do you read that word? Chomas ancha? What is it? Anach. So the Gemara says that it moved over to the choma. How about mechoma la'ir? D'chsiv kol Hashem la'ir yikare, that it went over to the city. U'me'ir lahar. What about the mountain? D'chsiv vayal kvod Hashem me'al toch ha'ir vayamera al hahar asher mikedem la'ir. What about umehar lemidbar? How do we know that it got to the desert? Because d'chsiv tosheves be'eretz midbar. Midbar also v'yashva b'makoma, from the midbar it went up to the heavens. The Shechina went all the way up. D'chsiv elei chashuv el makomi. So the Gemara details all 10 steps. We actually have a halachic reality to the Shechina. It's not just stam and agarata. We know that in Siman Kuf Beis in the Gemara, based on the Gemara in Brachos, is that when the person behind you is in Shmona Esrei, the concern about backing up into them is not distracting them. That's not the problem. The problem is that you're interfering with Shechina, and that is unacceptable. So there are great stories of great Gedolim who have done great things. I shared the story back in Maseches Brachos, most likely that my good friend Johnny, we were in Shalvim together. We went to go see Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and everybody wanted to be close to the Gadol Hador. So my friend Johnny was standing right behind Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and he had the longest Shmona Esrei ever. All of a sudden, you see Rav Chaim Kanievsky's like, so every couple of minutes, he's turning around to see if my friend Johnny finished his Shemona. The Gadol Hador is sitting and waiting. The Shechina was there, nothing to do with Johnny. The Shechina was there. You're not allowed to interrupt. So that's the Shechina is a mitzias. There is a reality to it. It's not just conceptual. It's not just metaphorical or a euphemism of some kind. It's the real deal, and that is what the Gemara is detailing here. 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Yochanan, Shisha chodashim nisakva Shechina l'Yisrael b'midbar shema yachzru b'tshuva. Wow, Kadosh Baruch Hu waited 6 months for the Jews to do tshuva, and we didn't. Keban shelo Amar tipach atzman, they have caused agony for themselves. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Ve'eni Rishaim," the eyes of the Rishaim tichlana will be consumed. Umanos avad minahem, and they will lose all escapes. V'tikvasa mipach nefesh, and their hope is going to be agony of the soul. Uchanegdan, period. And that's that was that little short piece about the 6 months. Uchanegdan, we had also said that, correlating to the movements of the Shechina, we also saw that Galsa Sanhedrin, that the Sanhedrin moved many times. That's Migamar. That's from the tradition. That is not from Psukim and Chomesh, obviously. Of course, we know bottom of Lamed Aleph, Milishkas Hagazis, that's where it started. And then Lechanus, it went to the stores. The store is an interesting discussion here. What does it mean that they went to the stores? So the Mefarshim explain that we were talking about moving the Bezdin to other places because there were so many cases that they had to deal with. They couldn't all fit in one place, so they split up the Batei Din to other places. Mechanus Yerushalayim, from the stores to Yerushalayim Liyavne, and turning to the top of Lamed Aleph Beis, Miyavne Leusha, and then back, Umiusha Liyavne, and then back again, Umiyavne Leusha, a little back and forth, Umiusha Leshafram, Umishafram Lebeis Sha'arim, Lebeis Sha'arim Letzipora, Umitzipora Letveria. But Tveria was the worst. The Sanhedrin at that time was the worst of all of them at that time. But Tveria Amuka Mikulan, it was in the worst depths of all of them. Shene'emar v'shafalt me'eretz tadabri. Fine, that's what the Gemara says about them. Rabbi Lazar Omer Sheish Galus Shene'emar. There were 6 different levels of Galus. Shene'emar, as the pasuk reads, Ki Ki heishach yoshvei marom kirya niskeva yashpila ad eretz yagiana ad afar. So there's a lot of downward references in the pasuk, and that is how Rabbi Lazar says that there are 6 such references. Of course, we know that from our depths is where we will arise. Rav Yochanan and Misham, from that very dark place of Tveria, asidin ligael, that is where the geula will come from. Shenemar isnari me'afar kumishvi, that we will brush off our dust from that place where we are so lowly. At that Sanhedrin in Tveria at that time, things were very bad, and that's where we'll grow from. That brings us to the next Mishnah, 12 lines down. Let's continue. Rabbi Shub ben Korcha, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We've learned a number of takanas from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We'll see in the Gemara exactly how many we will have learned in the last parak and in the previous parak, and in where we are over here. It's approximately 9, but not so simple that it's 9. We'll get there. But what's the one that he's adding here? Shafilu Rosh Bezdin. If the head of the Bezdin was Bechol Makom, wherever he was, that was fine. But but we didn't need, when there were certain testimonies that were being given, we didn't need the Balei Din to follow the Rosh Bezdin wherever he was. He might have been on vacation in the Alps, doesn't matter. He goes to regular Bezdin with regular Dayanim, all is well. He doesn't have to follow him everywhere. And that was Gzeira of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So the Gemara opens with the story. There was a woman, Izmanu Ladina. She was summoned to come to Bezdin, Kame de Amemar, in front of Amemar, who was the Rosh Bezdin, Binahardoi. So that was a Bezdin, and a summons was sent out for her to come to Bezdin. So the Gemara says, a quarter of the way down, Azal Amemar leMechoza. Yeah, they were supposed to be in Nahardoi, but Amemar had some business in another city, so he left. He went to Mechoza. But this woman who was summoned to Bezdin didn't follow him. Below Azla Basrei, she didn't go to Mechoza where he was. So Kasab Psicha Ilava. He wrote a strong negative comment. No, that's unacceptable. You're in what's the word? Not contempt. You're excommunicated. It's not the word I'm thinking of. Yeah. Okay. So basically, she was in trouble that she didn't listen to Bezdin. So it says the Gemara, Amarle Ravashi la'amemar. Ravashi says to Amemar, wait a second. We said that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai put in a change of the rules, that Afilu Rosh Bezdin b'chol makom, you move. That's your problem that you went over to Mechoza. She's only supposed to go to Naharda. Shelo yihu ha'idim holchen ela l'makom havad. She only had to go as far as the vad. That's our Mishnah right here on Lamed Aleph and Beis. So why are you holding her in contempt of court? Because you went to Mechoza. She doesn't have to do more than Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, which is to go to the local Bezdin. She doesn't have to go all the way to you. So Amar Le, I made my response. You have to know how to learn that sheet of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It says the Gemara, Amar Le, it's true by Eidus HaChodesh, we don't want people to schlep too far, because if we do, that will make people not want to go to Bezdin. I went to go find Amemar wasn't in Narda. Now I have to schlep all the way out to Mechoza to go find him. Forget it. I'm not going to give testimony again. So when it came to the world of Eidus, that is where we had the leniency of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that one has to give testimony even and only in the local place, even if the Rosh Bezdin is far away. Aval hacha, but with this woman, it's Eved Love Ish Malveh, that when it comes to a case of a Malveh, then you have to go to that place where the Malveh is. If you're the Love and you're being brought to court for the possibility of needing to return a loan, so then you have to go to where the Malveh lives, and that is not where we apply the leniency of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in our Mishnah. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us almost halfway down on Lamed Aleph and Beis, Ein Kohanim Rishayim Lalos B'Sandalei and L'Duchan. You're not allowed to wear any kinds of shoes when a Kohen duchans, as we all know. It's the days where you hope that the Kohanim have matching socks. I have learned as a Moel that when you go into Russian homes, you have to take off your shoes. Don't ever go with the gamble of, the socks are close enough. Sometimes they're not close enough. So that's what the Gemara says. Kohanim, they couldn't duchen unless they were barefoot. You could wear socks, obviously, but you can't wear shoes. Bezo, and that is echad mitisha takano shehiskin Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. That was one of the 9 takanos that he said. She's the high pirka. 6 are in this parak. The chada de pirka kama. 1 is in the first parak. The idach, what? So that's 6 plus 1. That's 7. What about the other 2? We said there were 9. The idach, what is the 7? What is the 8th one? So it's one. No, this is one of the 9. It's one of the ones Shista Hypirka. It's one of the 6. But the Gemara is now that's 6. This is, and then 7 is in the previous parak. Now we're learning 8 and 9. What?
This is one of the 6.
It's one of the 6. It's one of the 6. Yeah. So it says the Gemara halfway down. V'idach. What is the 8th one? What is the 8th of the takanos of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai? Titania Gershon Iskar Bisman Azet Sarch Sheyafarish Rova Lakino. We said that Again, the Brisa says Bisman Azev, whatever that means. We don't know exactly. We know it's in the times of the Tanaim, so a couple hundred years in the 300-400 year range, but we don't know exactly when it was. But the Brisa says that Afal Pikein, that people still needed to separate a Rova Lakino. They needed to separate money that normally a ger would have brought korbanos in the time of the Beis Hamikdash as part of his conversion. So here he has to separate the money. And Amar Rav Shem ben Elazar Kfar Nimne Ala Rav Yochanan. Let's start referring to Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ubitla mipnei takala. What we were concerned about is the takala, people separating money as hektish and then not having a way to use that money in a meaningful way. That could cause for some serious problems. So that's number 8 of the takanas. What's number 9? The idach, that's a machlokas. Pluk to the Rav Papa Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Each of them had a different opinion of what the 9th of the takanos of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai was. According to Rav Papa, he says, Omar Kerem Ravai. It has to do with Kerem Ravai. It has to do with the 4th year of an orla tree. The way that it works is that a new tree, the first 3 years are prohibited to eat. That's the 3 years of orla. The 4th year is called Neta Ravai, and the 4th year you're allowed Kerem Ravai. You're allowed to eat the grapes of those vines, but only in Yerushalayim. You have to schlep into Yerushalayim. So we'll see what the details are about Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai in a minute. That's Shita number 1. And the second possibility says the Gemara of Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Lashon Shel Zahuris. We learned about the Lashon Shel Zahuris Maseches Yuma, that there was the crimson ribbon that was put around the Sir Lazazel that would change colors, miraculously would change colors when a Kadosh Baruch Hu would grant forgiveness to the Jews. So let's get into each one. Rav Papa Amar Kerem Ravai Tanya. The Brisa writes Kerem Ravai Hayolu Yerushalayim Halach Yom Kol Tzad. That if a person lived within 1 day's walk in any direction of Yerushalayim, they were obligated to bring the Kerem Ravai, the vines of the 4th year of the grapes, to Yerushalayim. V'zohi Tchuma. Here are the cities that are the borders. We learned this. Elas Minat Safon, and that the city of Eilat. Americans don't call Eilat Elas. But when you read it in the Gemara, it's Elas Minat Safon. It's like a funny dialect. Yeah, it's just funny that like we call it the Kosel, but we don't call it Eilat Elas when we're talking about it. It's just a funny thing that we do. It's very from, super from. Elas Minat Safon. Also, what does Tzafon mean? Eilat in the south. So that's a correction in some of the Meforshim here that it actually should be done. It should be the case because that's where the city is. Big discussion in the poskim if that's considered Chutz La'aretz or not. Is Eilat considered formally part of Eretz Yisrael from the kibush of Rabbi Yeshua? These are real shilas in poskim. You have to keep 2 days of Yontif in Eilat. Okay, that's not for now. Akravas, the city of Akravas min Hadaram, maybe that should be a different girsa too. Lud min Amara, Yarden min Amizrach. V'amar ulu b'tema Rabbi Bar Ulam Rav Yochanan Matam. What is the reason why we were obligated to bring the Kerem Ravai to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim? Says the Gemara, Kedei la'ater shuke Yerushalayim b'peiros. That was in order to make sure that the marketplaces were filled with beautiful fruits. Last of the short lines, Lamed Aleph and Beis V'Tanya, and the Brisa writes, Kerem Ravai haya'oleh Haya lo the Rabbi Eliezer b'mizrach Lud b'tzar Kfar Tavi. It was on the eastern side by Lud, next to the city of Kfar Tavi. Ubikesh Rabbi Eliezer lehafkir lanim, and he wanted instead to be mafkirid. Amrlo Talmidav, don't worry about it. Rebbe, they said to Rabbi Eliezer, let's follow the flow here. Rabbi Eliezer, his Talmidim said to him, Rebbe, Kfar nimnu chavercha alav v'hitiru. You don't have to worry. That's totally mutter because your friend, he already gave the heter. So says the Gemara, Man Chavrecha, who's your friend that the Talmidim were saying to Rabbi Eliezer? Who's Rabbi Eliezer's friend? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So that's approach number 1. Next, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Lashon Shel Zahuris. What was the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai possibility? What was the possible takana within this world of the crimson wool? The Tanya, the Brisa writes, B'rishona hayu kosher Lashon Shel Zahuris al Pesach ulam mibachutz. Famous, we learned this already. That they used to hang the crimson wool on the outside of the ulam so that people in the mikdash could see it. Hil ben hayu smechen, if it turned white, lavan, if it turned white, people were thrilled. Lo hil ben hayu atzevin, and then if they stayed red, that was a problem because then that means they didn't get tshuva. Hiskinu sheyu kosherin oso al pesach ulam mibifnim. So then a takana was made that it should be put inside the ulam, but still. You can't tell a Jew not to look somewhere. They were peeking in, looking around the corner. It was the ulam. It was okay for them to see inside the ulam. The restrictions on seeing things. That's a shaila that we learned about also in the Gemara about whether everyone is allowed to look into the Kodesh. Anyways, under those circumstances, they were looking into the ulam. Hilben hayu smechen lo hilben hayu atzev. And if it turned white, they were thrilled, and if it stayed red, they were sad. So then they added the takana yet again. Hiskinu sheyu kosher no so chatzio besela v'chatzio bein karnav shel sir mishtalech, that they would tie some of it on a rock near the cliff, near the top of the cliff, and some of it on the horns. Okay, so these are the two approaches. That last takana is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. All we're discussing right now is what is the ninth takana. Version 1 of the ninth takana is Rav Papa, is that we're talking about the fact that by Kerem Revai it does not need to be brought to Shalayim anymore. And according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the ninth takana was that we no longer hung up the crimson red, the wools, the zahuris in the Mikdash at all. We just did it only out by the cliff. Okay. See, these are the two shitas. Why didn't each of them hold like one another? So that's the Gemara's next question. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we're 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. We're actually going to plow through Lamed Beis and Aleph. It'll still be quick. We'll get done in time, but it's quite a bit of ground to cover, but we don't have a choice and we're going to get there. Says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, my time Rav Papa. Why didn't Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak say like Rav Papa's approach about the Kerem Revai, that the takana was that we no longer have to bring Kerem Revai to Shalayim? So says the Gemara, Amar Lachi Sal Kadaitach Rabban Amar Lach Isal Kadaitach Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. If you want to say that the person who, remember we said the Talmidim said to Rabbi Eliezer, your friend was misaking. So it says the Gemara, really? Chaver Rabbi Eliezer mihava. That's not correct. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wasn't his friend. Rabbo hava. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wasn't his chaver. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe. So therefore, it can't be Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and that's what bugged him. So says the Gemara, "V'idach." How does the other sheet explain if in fact it's true, and it is true that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Rebbe of Rabbi Eliezer? If that's true, then how do you explain the brisa? The brisa doesn't make any sense. Then the name of your chaver, Rabbi Eliezer's chaver, was not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai; it was a Talmud. V'idach. How do they explain? Kaven the Talmidim hava, because the people who were responding back to Rabbi Eliezer were his Talmidim, Rabbi Eliezer's Talmidim. Lavorach ar lememrele leRabbe Ramcha. It's not appropriate to say to your Rav, your Rebbe told me, or your Rebbe said. Think about it. It's like not nice. You call a Rav to ask a shayla. Let's say you call Rabbi Shechler or Rav to ask a shayla, and they say something. You're like, yeah, but your Rebbe said something. It's chutzpah. So the Gemara says that they didn't want to say something that was not nice. So instead of referring to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as Rabbi Eliezer's Rebbe, they called him his chaver out of respect, out of deference, just to be more polite. Okay, what about the other way? The Rav Papa, my time Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Why didn't Rav Papa, who held that the takana was about Kerem Revai, why doesn't he hold like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who says that it was about the Zahuris, the Lashon Shel Zahuris, about the crimson wool? So it says the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom, Amar Lachi Sal Kadaitach Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. If you want to say that the takana is about the Lashon Shel Zahuris, that it's about the crimson, that's impossible. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we have a Lashon Shel Zahuris. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we're going to see exactly when he lived. We could figure out within a plus or minus of a couple of years of when he was born. So it says the Gemara as follows. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Kol shnosav shel Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai me'eve esrim shana. He lived 120 years. Mem shana asak b'pragmatia. The first 40 years he was in business. Mem shana lamad. For 40 years he pounded in the base medrash, just sat and learned yom v'layla. And mem shana limei. Then once he filled the kli, then he became a teacher. Okay, so that's what he did. The Tanya, the Brisa also writes, Mem shana kodem shenechrav habayis. For the 40 years prior to the Churban Beis Hamikdash, lo haya lashon shel zahuris malbin elamadim. For those 40 years prior to the Churban, it never turned white. The lashon shel zahuris, it always stayed red. So why would Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai make a takana to move it if it never turned white when it was in his lifetime? It never happened. It's not mishacharav habayis. Then it says that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then his skin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It doesn't even make any sense. The flow doesn't make any sense. For the 40 years prior to the Churban, the Lashon Shel Zahuris never turned white. And Mishachara Beis Hamikdash, he made a takana to move the Lashon Shel Zahuris out of the Beis Hamikdash. No way. That's why Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that's why Rav Papa doesn't hold the Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So it says the Gemara, V'idach, how would he explain himself? Osam Arbayim Shana Dolama, the 40 years that he was learning, Talmud Yoshev Lifnei Rabbo Hava. He was a student sitting at the feet of his Rebbe. The Amar Milsa, he said something that made a lot of sense. The logic was still true. V'yistaber Ta'amei. It was really, it was just an explanation of a sugya more than anything else. It wasn't meant to be Lemaisa for right now, but had it been that the Beis Hamikdash would have come back, that takana would have been in place, and he just said it in his name. But it's true, Taka, that in the times of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that the Lashon Shel Zahuris never changed colors. Let's get into the structure of Shmona Esrei of Rosh Hashana. Says the Mishnah on the top of Lamed Beis Amid Seder Brachos Somer Avos V'Gvuros V'Kedushas Hashem V'Kol Malchos Imahem Ve'eno Tokea. First we say Avos as always, Gvuros as always, Kedushas Hashem, that's Atah Kadosh. However, of course, we know that we don't say Baruch Atah Hashem HaMelech HaKadosh so much later in davening. A mistake that I have made before, where you start just you're rolling. You got to start your Shemona Esrei over L'chora if you do that. If you say it's, unless you say Melech HaKadosh, and then you can continue, but you skip to like 60% of what you're supposed to do. That's a problem. But anyways, so that the Avos Gevuras Kedushas Hashem, and then the section of Shemona Esrei of Malchios was included in Kedushas Hashem. It wasn't its own separate, distinct bracha. The Eino Tokea. We were not Tokea after Malchios. And then what's next? Then Kedushas Hayom. Right, we're going to speak specifically about the importance of the day of Rosh Hashana v'Tokea. Then we are Tokea there. Zichronos v'Tokea, Shofros v'Tokea. Those two sections we read with their psukim, and then we blow shofar. And then v'Omer Avoda v'Hoda Birkas Kohanim Di Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. That's a shita of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And to highlight the nuance of his shita is that we say Malchios in Kedushas Hashem without shofar. Amar Rabbi Akiva, im eino tokea ila Malchios lamahu maskir. I don't understand. If you're not going to be tokea, then why does the Shemona Esrei Rosh Hashana even bother to have Malchios mentioned? Seemingly, according to the question, it implies that Rabbi Akiva held that the Tkiya shofar was the Ikran Shel Dvarim and not the Malchios, not the Psukim. Says the Gemara. Therefore, says the Mishnah, 6 lines down, therefore, Ella, what does Rabbi Akiva suggest? Ella, yes, Omer Avos Gevuras Kedushas Hashem, right? That's what he said. V'kol al Malchios im Kedushas Hayom v'Tokea. That's where their machlokes is in two parts. Number one is the Tanakama of Yochanan ben Nuri says that Malchios was included in Kedushas Hashem. And Rabbi Akiva says that it's not including Kedushas Hashem, but in Kedushas Hayom. And the Tanakama of Yochanan ben Nuri said that we are not tokeh afterwards. Rabbi Akiva says we are tokeh afterwards. And then Rabbi Akiva continues his shita, Zichronos v'Tokea, Shofros v'Tokea, V'Omer Avoda v'Odah Birkas Kohanim, and the rest of davening is as we know it. So then says the Gemara as it opens 7 lines down on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, Rabbi Akiva, Meina tokeh l'malchios, lama hu mazkir. We had said in our Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Akiva that he asked this strange question: if we're not blowing shofar, why are we saying malchios? Says the Gemara, lama hu mazkir. What are you talking about? Rachmana Amar Ikar. The Torah says that we should mention it. We learned this earlier in the Masechta that Malchios are based on Psukim. It says the Gemara, really what was the question is, Elalama Eser. Why do we still need 10 psukim? If you're going to tell me that Malchios doesn't include shofar, so we should say 1 pasuk less. We shouldn't say 10. We should say 9. Lema Tesha, Tehol Ishtani. Since it's different from the others, I understand Zichronos and shofar should each have 10. We're going to learn where this comes from in this halacha of 10 at the bottom of the page. But maybe we should say by Malchios that it should be that way, and that should be the shita. That was what bothered Rabbi Akiva about Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, is that he felt that there should have been another change. If you take away shofar, you also have to take away a pasuk. Okay, Tana Rabbanan, Minayin she'omrim avos. How do we know that we should say the paragraph of avos in Shemona Esrei? This gets to the skeleton of every Shemona Esrei that we ever say. We never say a Shemona Esrei without this. Even in the rare circumstances of saying Havinein, we always start with Avos Gevuras and Kedushas Hashem. So how do we know this? Shenemar Havu Lashem B'nei Elim. We should make reference to the B'nei Elim, to the ones that are very strong, the ones down here that are very strong, the Avos. That's the pasuk. What the pasuk means. If Havu Lashem B'nei Elim, that's why we say the bracha of Avos. Minayin She'omrim Gevuros. How do we know that we say the second bracha about how strong a Kadosh Baruch Hu is? Shenemar, the pasuk says, Havu Lashem Kavod Va'oz. Oz is a Kadosh Baruch Hu's strength. Minayin She'omrim Kedushos. How do we know that we have to recognize the sanctity of Hashem? Shenemar, Havu Lashem Kavod Shemo. Yishtach Havu Lashem B'Hadras Kodesh Kedusha. Fine. Uminayin She'omrim Malchios Zichronos v'Shofros. Now let's get specific into the Shemona Esrei for Rosh Hashana. How do we know specifically that we should say Malchios Zichronos and Shofros? This is a machlokes as to how we understand the following pasuk. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dichsiv Shabbason Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. How do we parse this pasuk? When we see the word Shabbason, it means Zekushas Hayom. That's a reference to the sanctity of the day. That's the bracha of Atakadosh. Zikaron Elu Zichronos. That pasuk clearly references Zichronos. Trua Elu Shofros. We see the link between those two as well. When the pasuk says Trua, it means that we should be saying Shofros. And Mikra Kodesh, when the pasuk says the words Mikra Kodesh, it's Kadsheu Ba'asiyas Malacha, to make sure that we sanctify it by keeping the appropriate laws of that day, either doing the mitzvahs of the day or avoiding the isurim of the day. However, Amalur Rabbi Akiva, no, you omitted a very simple understanding of the pasuk. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down. Why isn't it that when you saw the word Shabbason, which means to stop, Shabbos means to stop, why didn't you assume Shvus Shabo Pasach HaKasut Tchila? Why didn't you say at the outset that we need to make sure that it's a day of Isser Malacha? Why did you learn it from Mikra Kodesh? Ella, therefore, says Rabbi Akiva, I darshan the pasuk differently. Says the Gemara Shabbason. When we see the word Shabbason, Kadsheu B'asiyas Malacha, we should sanctify with the actions that we do. The mitzvahs I say that we should do and avoid the isur d'oraisa as well. Zikaron elu zichronos. The word zikaron in the pasuk or zichron in the pasuk references the section of Shmona Esrei zichronos trua elu shofros and nikra kodesh zo kedusha asayim. But either way, we see from the pasuk, no matter how you learn the pasuk, is that we need to have malchios zichronos and shofros. Minay shomer malchios. Well, we didn't see malchios. Excuse me. That's the Gemara's question now. Minay shomer malchios. From where do we see that we have to say malchios? Tanya Rabbi Omer ani Hashem Elokeichem u'b'chodesh hashvi'i zu malchus. These are two psukim that are juxtaposed. And I am Hashem, your God. And in the 7th month, that is the month of Malchus. The month of Tishrei is the month of Malchus. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Einot Tzarech. I don't even need that. Why not? Because Harehu Omer, we have another pasuk that says, I don't need those words of Ani Hashem Elokeichem that Rebbe quoted in the beginning of the Brisa, because what do we learn from those words? Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Zebana Av. This teaches us a rule from here to apply elsewhere. Zichronos automatically brings about malchios. So we learned already in the previous pasuk, the drasha that the Tanaim had about the pasuk of Shabbason, that because we know that we have to say zichronos, automatically we have to say malchios. Hechan omra lekdushas hayom. Where in Shmona Esrei do we put the bracha of kedushas hayom? Not atakadosh, but the bracha that is specific about the day. Right, the bracha that we end with Hamelach, not Hamelach HaKadosh, of Mekadesh Yisrael, that bracha. So how do we know where to place that? That's a machlokas as well. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Rabbi Omer, Ima Malchios Omra. We say it with Malchios, Mamatzinu. The reason why is because B'chol Makom, B'Revis, we always find that the bracha of Bir Chasim is always the 4th. Think about Shabbos. We do Avos, we do Gvuros, we do Atakadosh, and then we get into the bracha of Shabbos, Mekadesh HaShabbat. By every davening, it's like that. The bracha, not the bracha of Kedushas Hashem, but Kedushas Hayom is always 4th. So he says, Afkan B'Revi. So to over here, that's where it should be. Rashba Gomer, 3rd of the way down, a little bit more, almost halfway down. Rashba Gomer, no. Ima Zichronos Omer, we say it with the bracha of Zichronos. Why do we do that? Because Mamatzinu B'chol Makom Be'emtza. It's not that it's the 4th. He says it's that it's in the middle. It happens to be that the 4th and the middle coincide when there's only 7 brachos. The middle bracha would be Kedushas Hayom. But here, it's not about the 4th. It's only about being in the middle. And therefore, on a day where we have Zichronos, Malchios, and Shofros, we have to move it into the middle. And that is when we would say the bracha of Kedushas Hayom, Afkan Ba'emsa. Ukshakichu Bezdin as Hashana be'usha, when they were Makadesh, the Rosh Hashana in Usha, Yarad, the Chazan, went down to daven. Yarad Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, he was the Chazan, Lifnei Rashbag, V'asa ke Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, and he did like Rav Yochanan ben Nuri did in our Mishnah. Remember what our Mishnah said is that he combined Malchios with the bracha of Kedushas Hashem, and he was not tokeh afterwards. Amar lo Rabban Shimon, no, lo hayunoagin came b'yavne. That is an uncomfortable situation when the Gadol Hador calls you out for making a huge error in public. Not comfortable. You made a mistake. That's not the minhag in Yavne. Liyom hasheni. The words liyom hasheni seem to imply the next day. Okay, we'll see that that's not simple. But anyways, the next day or at another time, the next time somebody davened, it was a different chaz, and it was Reb Chanina, and he did like Rabbi Akiva, which is that he said Malchios with Kedushas HaYom, not Kedushas Hashem, and they were Tokea. Amar Rashbag, this is the right way to do it. Kacha Yanoagin b'Yavne. So says the Gemara, Lememra, this seems to imply that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva sphere, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is in lockstep with Rabbi Akiva, but that can't be. The Amar Rabbi Akiva, as we saw in our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that Malchios in Kedushas Hayom Amar Lahu, that he says Malchios with Kedushas Hayom, but Rashbag Omer Kedushas Hayom im Zichronos Amar Lahu. That doesn't work. So how can it be that the story that we just heard is that it seems to be that Rashbag holds like Rabbi Akiva when we know that they are not in lockstep? So Amar Abzera, they're not in lockstep on that point. You're correct that they disagree about what's said with Kedushas Hayom and what's said with Kedushas Hashem. However, what they are in agreement about is Amar Abzer Lomar Shetokin the Malchios. Everyone agrees that we should be Tokea by Malchios, and in fact, that's what we do. That's why either in your private Shmona Esrei for the shuls that have a minhag to do that, but not what we do here. When the Chazan finishes the bracha of Malchios, we stop, and the Rabbi Robinson's about the Baal Tokeh, we do, and then we continue, and then we go to Zichronos, and then we stop. That's how we paskin. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, but with the blend of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That's why sometimes it's very hard to paskin things from Gemaras, because it's not clear, it's not crystal clear, but that is what the Gemara seems to conclude. Now, we had said that L'Yom HaSheni, then 1 year in Yavne, someone made a mistake, and we said L'Yom HaSheni, that Yarad Reb Chanina, my Sheni, Sheni the what? What are we talking about? Ilema Yom Tov Sheni, if you want to say that year had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, well, this was well before the takana that we're acclimated to of having 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. It always just simply depended on Kiddush HaChodesh. If you're saying that there were 2 days of Rosh Hashanah at that time in Yavne, then that would also imply that that month of Elul just prior to that Rosh Hashanah was Me'ubar, and that's not possible because Ve'amar B'chanina Bar Kahana, we've seen this many times already. We've never seen such a thing. So Amar Rav Chizda, you're right. It didn't mean that there were 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. My Sheni, what did it mean in this case when it said the Sheni, the second time? L'Yom Sheni L'Shana Abba, the next year. There's only 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, but L'Sheni, the second year. Not now. It doesn't mean the second day. It means the second. Next Mishnah. We'll take this one all the way to the end of the page, and then almost to the end of the page, and then we'll stop. It says the Gemara in Pochsin Me'asar Malchios, Me'asar Zichronos, Me'asar Shofros, 10 psukim for each of the 3 primary sections of Shemon Esrei. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer Im Amar Gimel Gimel Mikul and Yatsa, and this is difficult to understand. 3 is it 3 plus 3? How does it work? Is it 1 of each to total 3? The Gemara is going to ask and answer that question. Says the Gemara Hani Asar Malchios Keneged Mi. Where do we get the number of 10 for Malchios from? Amar Rebbe. Keneged Asara Hilulim Shamar David b'Sefer Tehillim, because of the 10 praises that David wrote in Sefer Tehillim. Now, if any of you have ever read any of Sefer Tehillim, we know that there's way more than 10 praises in Sefer Tehillim. Says the Gemara, Hilulim Tuva Havu. There was way more than 10. So how did you get to 10? Says the Gemara, there's only 10 in one parak that I'm referencing. Hanach t'chsiv behu halaluhu b'seika shofar. And that pasuk, it says there were 10 halaluhus, 10 praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's where the number 10 comes from. Rabbi Yosef Amar that the number 10 comes from somewhere else. Keneged asar tzadibra shenemar lo l'Moshe b'Sinai. They're reflective of the 10 commandments. What's the connection? You need Rishonim for that. Not clear from the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar keneged asar mamar sheben nivra olam. It's from the 10 phrases with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Hainin, where do we know that this number is 10? It says the Gemara by Yomer de Brachis. However many times it says the word Omer in Parshas Brachis. Says the Gemara, go look and count. You'll see it's not 10. It's Tes Havu. It's only 9. Says the Gemara, you're right. It only says Amira 9 times in the Psukim in Brachis, but the word Brachis itself, Brachis Nami Maimar Hudechsi Bidvar Hashem Shamayim Naasu, and therefore we add in the word Brachis to make it 10. So therefore we know that 10 is the ideal number of Psukim based on one of these references. Again, it's still not super clear as to how all of these connect, as to why we need 10 psukim. It's not logical from the Gemara. We need to spend more time on this, and we can't. But that is what the Gemara assumes, and that is how our Sidurim are built. Next, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, we had said in our Mishnah, and it was a little unclear, Im Amar Shalosh Mikulin Yatsa. So Ibailahu, Hey Chiktani, I don't understand. How did this work out? It says the Gemara, Shalosh min HaTorah, Shalosh min HaNavim, Shalosh min HaKsuvim, Tahavu Teisha. Are we saying that really it's not so much that you need 10, but Lakula, you can do 3 of each, which totals 9. Vika Beinayu Chada, and the difference between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is only one, because in Malchios you need 10. And we're saying, okay, but if you just did 3 from each, you'll be fine, meaning you're only off 1 pasuk. Odilma, or perhaps Echad min HaTorah, Echad min HaNavim, Echad min HaKsuvim, Dahavian lehu shalosh. Maybe the leniency of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is that you only need a total of 3, 1 from Torah, 1 from Nevi'im, 1 from Suvim, and then you're done. And then V'ika Benayu too, but that's a huge difference from 10 psukim down to 3. That's a 70% reduction. Of course, that's a big difference. Says the Gemara. Let's see what the answer is. 5-6 lines from the bottom. Tashma, the Brayso writes to Tanya in Pochsin Me'asara Malchios, Me'asar Zichronos, Me'asar Shofros. If you can't go less than 10 from any 10 psukim in any of these sections, Amar Sheva Mikulan Yatsa, and if you would say, if you only were able to say 7, you're Yotze, Keneged Shiva Rikim, in order to correspond to the 7 firmaments, I believe is the Art Scrolls word. If I had to guess, I didn't look, but that's like such an Art Scroll word, that Rakias, firmaments. Anyways, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar, Hapoches lo yivchos misheva, v'im Amar shalosh mikulan yatsa, keneged Torah, nevi'im uksuvim, v'amar la keneged kohanim levim v'Yisraelim. So the Gemara here is a little, it requires a little bit of clarity beyond the words. What the Gemara is saying is like this: it can't be that what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri meant is 3 psukim from each, and that it's only 10 in the ideal and 3339 in the bidiyah. It can't be that way because according to the other shita, that if you can't do 10, you can do 7. It can't be 7 from each. That's 21. That's more than the 10 that you're required. It has to be a total of 7, which also means that it therefore has to be a total of 3. And Amar Rav Huna, Amar Shmuel, halacha Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. The halacha is like Rav Yochanan ben Nuri that we are supposed to blend Malchios into Kedushas Hashem, although we don't paskin like the part of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri in Shulchan Aruch where it says that we're not tokeh by Malchios because we are. We will stop right here at the Mishnah at the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph and pick up in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night. Tomorrow we're going to learn Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, Lamed Gimel, Amud Aleph, and much of Lamed Gimel, Amud Beis. That's Wednesday. On Thursday, we're going to learn everything but the last few lines. And then on Shabbos, we'll have our sim. It'll all work out in Yirtzeh Hashem. Wishing you all a beautiful night.